Hello, friends. Today I am joined by Erin Cox. Erin is a joy chasing homeschool mama to four, ages young adult down to elementary. She married her grade school sweetheart over 20 years ago and lives to love him well. She's also the author of multiple early years Charlotte Mason and classically inspired programs at the Gentle and Classical Press. Erin, I am so excited to get to chat with you today and just wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit more details about yourself, your family, and how you guys got started homeschooling.
Sure. Thank you, Amy, for having me again. And I'm excited to be here. Um, as you said, I have four kiddos and we have a big age range. So it's been a fun journey, but my oldest just turned 20 and my youngest will turn 8 in a couple of months. So we have this big kind of age span with them. And my older two, there's a gap between like my older two and my younger two of 9 years. And so I got to kind of like do everything the first time and then have all this time to think about it and then do it over again with the next batch. So it's like this very unique experience. A lot of times, if you have a big age range, it's filled with kids the whole time. So that was a fun opportunity for me to kind of have a little bit of a do-over, like, because we always have regrets, and I'll have regrets with this last set as well. But love my husband today. Obviously, we've been married for 23, no, yes, something like that, 20-ish years. I don't keep up. He does. He's better at it than I am. Math is hard. And we live in central Alabama on a little homestead, and we've been homeschooling for 14 years. So this beginning is year 14. So we started kind of mid-year and started homeschooling. It was one of those things where I learned about it when I was pregnant with my oldest, but I was like, that'll never happen because I had a college degree and I have to work and I have to earn a living for my family and all these things. And also like then you see like back in the day, just a little bit of homeschooling, anything that you would see your families, it was, denim skirts to the floor, which is totally fine, not knocking that, but it's like hyper traditional homeschooled moms. And I wasn't even a Christian at the time. So I definitely wanted nothing to do with anything that seemed conservative or Christian. And that seemed to be what homeschooling was. But it just kind of, I had some seeds planted in the back of my mind at that age. And when my younger daughters, have two girls that are my oldest, both recently engaged, by the way, or one's engaged and one's like engaged to be engaged. So we're like working on apartment hunting and wedding planning for two at one time, which is interesting season to be in. And so they I like quit a job because it was stressful and I had to take her out of daycare. And then we just started doing things and just that little, that little bug in the back of my mind. And by this point, like I'd come to Christ and my husband was kind of on the way to that. So it was a very different period of our life. It seemed like obviously a major difference had happened in our lives. And so I wanted to raise my children in a way that I wasn't raised and teach them things that I didn't know. And that was just kind of like the beginning of the whole process. And it's been a fun, interesting, kind of crazy ride since then.
Well, so you kind of started, early on, not
Mhm.
thinking that was something you were intending to do, and then maybe thinking, wow, am I actually gonna do this crazy homeschool thing? But
Yes.
over the course of those years, both with your older daughters and now kind of as you're rehome, doing the second batch of homeschooling with your younger kids, I'm wondering how your approach to homeschooling or philosophy of education has grown or changed over that time.
So I think, what we read and who we listen to is so deeply impactful as far as like how we come into it. And some of the first, Charlotte Mason, it was Karen Andriola's Charlotte Mason Companion, was the first book I ever read. And I read that, well, not ever, but about homeschooling. And I read that while I was pregnant with my oldest. And I don't even know how I got it. I just remember sitting in her nursery pregnant with her reading it. And it talked about parenting. And I just, at that time, just kind of like disregarded everything about, Christ that was in it. I was like, this is good advice. Otherwise, I'm going to leave that out. I was agnostic. And but just seeing parenting and education being approached in such a wildly different way than anything that I had experienced in my own life. and wanting that very much for my children and desiring to give them just gentleness and peace and like a very natural, intuitive childhood that just kind of honored their development and allowed them to pursue their interests and their talents and their dreams and stuff. And that was the part that early on very much appealed to me, was just like the freedom that it gave. I read, let's see, John Taylor Gatto early on as well. And so I was very much into unschooling, child-led, interest-led learning, those types of things. And that played a huge part in my girls' education, probably up through the middle of their elementary years. But during that time, as I got to know more homeschoolers and got plugged into the homeschool community, and I learned from other people, I started learning about classical education, reading more of Charlotte Mason's works and stuff. And, you know, and then being around women that were older than me and wiser than me, and they had more children than me, and they'd been doing all this stuff longer than me, and watching them and following behind them, and, you know, and wanting to be mentored by them, and them being gracious enough to do so. And recognizing like there's some, you know, there's a lot of freedom in home education that is a blessing to us, in that our children have a lot of margin in their day that they can pursue interests and stuff. But there are also things that our children of their own volition would never be attracted to. They would never want to learn those things. And, you know, anytime I kind of like say anything negative about unschooling at all, the response is always like, you weren't doing it right. And I just think that there are some children that just like works for very naturally. And maybe there's some parents that just do it better than me. Maybe that's how it was. But what I recognized was some of the areas that my children need to grow in as far as their character development was concerned were areas that were very uncomfortable for them. And they didn't want to do it. You know, it wasn't anything that, no matter how I strew it about or modeled it or whatever, like no matter what kind of magic hocus pocus I try to do in the background, it wasn't going to actually draw them in and develop their character in the way that needed to be developed, and help them overcome skill gaps and knowledge gaps that they had, without just being like, we're going to do no matter what, we're going to do the hard things. And there's some things that like my girls, they just did not want to do them for the longest time. And I was persistent, because as the adult, I believed that these were very important parts of their education that could not be overlooked, because of the way that I wanted them to have like the fullness, because they were always drawn to like these clusters of things. And so they would be passionate about these clusters of things. So we started saying those are outside of school things, like pursue those things, enjoy those things, and dive deep. And maybe what you learn during school will actually even help with that interest even more. But we're going to do more things that are hopefully rooted in wisdom and tradition that is good. And so that's kind of been a big change for me, is like over time going from being very child-led, very child-focused, to being like, these are the books that people that are smarter than me say to read. So we are going to read these books, and we're going to see what happens when we read these books, and recognizing like they're not the books that they wanted to listen to. They may have complained halfway through the book, but it also did so much in their heart and their mind that they would have never gotten otherwise. And just kind of, I guess, holding back from wanting things to be like always what they wanted to do. That was kind of I know this is like a misunderstanding, but when I first began homeschooling, I thought that I saw a lot of value in like, if you love it, enjoy it, you'll learn it so much faster, right? And that's true. We do like absorb things immediately if they're really interesting to us or fun to us or whatnot. But at the same time, you can put too much merit in that and almost teach your children that if it's not fun, that you don't expect them to stick with it or do it. It can have that kind of like catch-22 that can come in later on. You're like, wait, it doesn't matter if you don't think math is fun, we still have to do it. And then you spend all this time, which Charlotte Mason would very much criticize, almost trying to entertain your children into learning and trying to get it in them anyway, because you've given them the message that it needs to be fun in order for them to value it and to learn it. And some things can be fun, and some things can be fun sometimes and then not other times. And we just have to have the perseverance and the integrity and the faithfulness to follow through on those things. So I would say I switched very much from a child-centered, child-led, very relaxed approach of homeschooling early on to, I think, I won't say like rigid or rigorous, but like diligent and faithful and consistent and prayerful, not just they're interested in this, so let's do a unit study on that and learn everything about that thing. Like that can be fun, but also how does that fit into the larger picture of what I want their education to be? How does this point to Christ? How does this help them understand him more, the world around them more, those types of things? And just kind of having an ultimate, I guess, end goal in mind that's not just about their enjoyment or, parking some knowledge in there, but like their actual character development and discipling them, those things that rose much more to the forefront from the earliest age. I've realized like as I grew and had more kids, like, you can write God's word on their heart as soon as they can talk. They don't have to be older. They don't even have to completely understand it for you to park it in there and it do its work and it be ready for them when the time comes for them to actually like understand it and apply that in their life and stuff. So that was a long-winded answer, but it was kind of a journey, and I'm almost at the other end of the spectrum now. And I think there's value in following interests and stuff, but I don't think it should be the steering of the ship. I think it should be, some packages that are on board, but not like what's your guiding light is, to kind of make a bad metaphor about the whole thing.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for having a posture of humility as we approach education, both as teacher and students, to
Hmm.
really teach our children that humility of being willing to listen to wisdom from outside
Yes.
of themselves, from outside of ourselves, right?
Hmm.
To even go through the process of wanting the Lord to asking the Lord to change what we want, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes that's what we need. I mean, sometimes I need that. I need to not want to go back and get another bowl of ice cream or whatever, right? So we need to have the Lord change our wants. And I
Yes.
also loved how you brought up that that doesn't mean that there's no space for all this incredible diving into interests and pursuing what makes our children unique, because when we homeschool, we have so much freedom and flexibility in the time.
Hmm.
My children have all just pursued their really sometimes very quirky or off the wall things
Yeah.
um, over the years. And that's because they have the time to do that.
Right.
So I am directing, the goals of their education and kind of steering the ship, like you were saying.
Hmm.
But I do it in such a way that leaves them plenty of white space to
Yeah.
have the freedom and to be willing to pursue their interests. I think 'cause they're not exhausted from all the things that they were doing in school.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree. And this is completely off topic, but your earrings are so cute.
Thank you.
The little bookcases.
They
And
are.
I was just thinking about what your fun earrings were. And I wore like these cherries today because if you can believe it, I found a sweater that has cherries on the buttons.
Oh
And
my.
then at a totally separate store, the exact same ones were made into earrings. And it's just fun. And I was just admiring, I was like kind of ADD. I was like,
My
her earrings are so cute.
My brother and sister-in-law gave these to me for my birthday, so they're
Oh,
definitely
that's
some of my new favorites. Yeah. Well, we've already talked about some of the really wonderful parts of homeschooling, but are there any other kind of favorite parts of homeschooling that you've experienced over the years?
oh, nothing profound. I love the fact that we don't have to particularly start our day at a certain time. Like I I tend to, a long time ago, Pam Barnhill had like a blog post that talked about tidal homeschooling. And I like to think of it as almost seasonal because there's just certain times of the year that it's easier when the sun's up early. It's easy to get up and get going and do all the things. And you're done by like 9 or 10 o'clock and everybody's able to get outside and play and all those types of things. And then there's the time of years where it's rainy and it's dark half the day and it's drizzly. And everything's cold and you just want to take things slow, and snuggle up and read half the day, and nobody's in a rush to go anywhere or do anything. So that's one of my favorite things about homeschooling. Like, I hate being bound by a particular schedule. I do not like to have to go anywhere if it's rainy, which we have co-op once a week. So we do have to go whether it's raining or not. But we actually don't have co-op for like most of December or January. So we can avoid the dreariness outside. And so that's probably one of my favorite things, is just the convenience of it. Being able to tailor it around our lives. We have had kind of a crazy year with sickness. We've had a lot of sickness. And then we found mold in our home, like in a very significant way, and had to move out and for 2 weeks. And my husband had to do the remediation because it's not covered by insurance. And it was just this giant thing when we had already had several sicknesses in a row that were like the whole family had them, everybody was out, down and out. Like, so our school year this year, like, we started in early September. We've only done reading and math, and we've only been able to do it around everybody's sicknesses, and then this like temporary move out and the construction of that, and then trying to get our house back together and get, like, our school room was one of the rooms that was impacted, so trying to get that back together. And my brain does not work if half my furniture is in my kitchen, you know what I mean? Like, I can't do it. So we've just like the bare minimum. So we're just now mid-October, well, it's late October, so I'm just the end of October, like actually starting all the other part of our curriculum. And if this had happened several years ago, I would have been freaking out. Like, I would have been like, oh my gosh, DHR is going to come and take my children. We haven't done science and history yet this year. And, like, I'm so behind. I'm such a failure and I can't get it together. And I would be questioning myself and questioning this calling. And I would just be in a tizzy about it. And I'm just like so okay with it. Like, it's totally fine. We're going to get to all of that stuff. We're going to probably finish it up in June or July, and that's okay too. Like, I don't have to have it done at a certain point. So we can do all those fun projects and read all those books and stuff throughout the summer. Like, we don't have to end in May. And so to just have that flexibility of, like, through family loss, family sickness, like new babies being born, all these things, like, we have that flexibility. So that's, again, kind of with the weather, like all the flexibility that's involved. And then it's just the conversations. Like, if we were not intentional about reading God's word, memorizing his word, memorizing catechisms, having discussions about those things, like, there are like thousands of conversations that would have never happened with my children, that I wouldn't know their heart about that thing. And they would hear parts and not have full clarity and understanding about the nature of God and what's meant by this and what's meant by that. And there's just so many opportunities for that just would not happen. Otherwise, I just would find it very hard for those things to kind of happen. We just have the space for that, just natural, organic conversation. And that's probably not only, that's my favorite. I would like to say sleeping in some's my favorite, but that's my real favorite thing. And it's I think, the most impactful. Look, there's all these benefits to homeschooling, but when it comes down to it, if you want your children to love the Lord and pursue him and understand his word and his character, and that process is going to look different for every kid and all that stuff. But if you want to have the foundation of that in a way that can't be replicated other ways, then to me, nothing can touch home education when it comes to that.
Yeah, just the flexibility and space for all of these
Yes.
things, both in the practical schedule and
Right.
also in the relationship, kind of. Yeah.
Yes. You said that with a lot fewer words than me. Yeah.
Well, what about some of the challenges of homeschooling? I know you face those as well, as we all do. What have been some of those challenges and how have you sought to overcome them?
So challenges for us have been mostly, okay, so there's probably two categories. Being in multiple seasons at one time. At one point, I had a teenager, a tween, a toddler, and a newborn, and being in all the seasons at one time. Like, I'm a grandma now. And so, and right currently, like, she still lives at home with us with our daughter, and she's one of the ones that's engaged. So they're getting, ready to move on to that next season. So I'm planning weddings. I'm taking care of a grandchild. helping people find and apply for apartments, those things, and make their financial plans for their future. And then also still teaching kids to read and doing, volcanoes and all those kinds of things. Like it's very, that's been one of the hardest things for me is just being able to and be up late with my big kids that's when they want to talk, but be up early with babies that need you first thing in the morning. So that's been challenging. It's gotten easier. It was the most challenging thing in my life for several years. But definitely, over time, those muscles kind of get stronger and you're able to do the things that you need to do. And so that would probably be the number one. And also, like coupled with that is like we have kids with like everybody's a little neurospicy in our house. So we've got ADHD and dyslexia and dyscalculia and dysgraphia and like all these disses and all that stuff. And a little bit of autism as well. And so it's very like varied. Everybody's strengths and weaknesses are all over the board. And so I have to stay ahead of that and anticipate this kid is going to need this extra thing with this topic and this lesson, but this one's not going to need that at all. But they need, this thing. Like this kid is reading well ahead of when he should, but he has no inferencing abilities whatsoever. So I'm going to have to like explain everything that's literal in this story. And then the other one is just like, we're still just working on reading and stuff. And also having like a teenager trying to graduate from high school with the learning disabilities at the same time that you've got little ones learning to read it with learning disabilities. So that's probably been our biggest challenge. To begin with, it was very difficult for me because I don't have any learning disabilities. And I taught myself to read before I entered kindergarten. And there were just things for me that were like, you just knew it. Like you just knew it where it said, I mean? I just was everything was very intuitive for me in a school setting. I had no challenges at all. And to then have a child with like profound learning disabilities that you would have to teach her the same thing hundreds of times before it made it through the thick wall into the permanent brain, who was also smart as a whip, which is kind of the hard thing too, is like how smart she was, how intelligent she is, but then also getting the information and the knowledge in there and making progress. So that was very hard, especially because she was my first one I taught to read, because my older daughter learned to read in school. So it's like my first child I'm teaching to read. She's not learning to read. And what am I doing wrong? And I'm messing it up and all this kind of stuff. And then just kind of learning, how to cope with that tension, how to rely on the Lord, knowing I was always doing my best and learning just to trust that like he is perfected in my weaknesses. He is all sufficient. I don't have to be everything. And getting to see like the end of that, like starting to try to teach her alphabet at 4, and by 8 she still didn't know it. But then now she has graduated high school and passed a graduation exam and has a job and is making like decent money to be 18 years old and is, happily engaged. And just she's moving on, and she's going to be okay. Like she's going to survive. And there was times that I was like, oh Lord Jesus, this is never going to be okay. And he knew the whole time that it was. So I would say just the being kind of spread thin, and everyone's learning uniqueness. And that's true whether you have kids with learning disabilities or not. Like all kids have their interests and the subjects they take to naturally, and just being able to pivot and adapt to what each of your children need, I think can probably be, because we think, oh, I'm going to find the perfect curriculum and I'm going to use that with this kid. And then that I'll use it with the next kid and the next kid and the next kid. And there may be some things you can do like that, but I've not found anything outside of All About Reading that I will consistently use with all of my children that it works for everybody. So that's probably been the biggest wake up call. It's not a figure it out one time and then you're done. Every time a kid goes through 5th grade, you're figuring out 5th grade for the first time because you're figuring out 5th grade for that child. And it gets easier to figure it out, but it's still different every time. So I think just kind of like accepting that that's okay. That's not like a failure. You didn't pick wrong the first time because it doesn't work for this kid. It's just a different kid, and just being comfortable with that and accepting that that's just reality, I think is also helpful.
Yeah, I think, I have 5 children and each of them is so different. And you think once I figure out how to be a good parent, like with this kid, then I'm
Yes.
set. And then you realize, like you were saying, oh no, this next kid is a totally different person. I suddenly don't know how to parent again. Not only
Yes.
do you get more comfortable with that process, I think,
Mhm.
but I also found that I'm a lot less anxious and worried about it. I put a lot less pressure on myself and on the
Mhm.
child, just
Yeah.
knowing that, oh, this is normal. This is
Yes.
okay. There's
Yes.
time. There is time. Yeah. Well, one of the things perspective does give us over many years of homeschooling different kinds of children, is we might focus on some different things with our younger children than we did with our older children. And so
Yes.
I'm wondering what kinds of things you have maybe changed, or maybe it hasn't changed, but that you really thought mattered in the younger years that maybe you don't think matters quite as much anymore. What do you choose to focus on?
So with my bigger kids, like I said, we did a lot of interest-based like learning and stuff. And I can say now that I regret like not postponing, but not taking math instruction as seriously early on with them as I have with my boys. So that's I've got 2 girls and 2 boys. I just refer to them like my girls and my boys. And so that would be one thing, is like learning how impactful consistency is, especially if you have kids with any kind of learning differences, but any kind of progress. If you ever kind of look at your kid and then you're looking at kids in public school and you're like, they're ahead of my kid or whatever, it's only the consistency. That is the only different thing. So for me, it was just figuring out like, always eat the frog, do the thing that's not everybody's favorite stuff, and get that done first, and be consistent in that. If you want to see your child make progress, you have to be consistent. You can't be the stumbling block to your child's progress. So with the girls, I was not as consistent as I wanted to be. We did a lot of arts and crafts, which I actually had like kind of gotten away from a little bit, just with so many kids and everything being so hectic. So this year is a big year of kind of pulling that back in and being like, we're doing hands-on stuff. Because for a few years with COVID and with so many at different ages and nap times and all these types of things, like we just didn't get out a lot. We didn't go on a lot of field trips. We didn't do a lot of community-based things. We didn't do a lot of hands-on learning at home because I was just kind of overwhelmed without pulling out paint and glitter. And so we're finally to a season now where I am prioritizing those things again, because I think they're very important. So that was something that I like did and then didn't do. And now I'm definitely like going back to that. And then what I did not do with my girls, and it wasn't that I didn't think it was important, it was just that I didn't have the knowledge, was training them in God's word, intentionally training them in particular character traits, like not just being like, be good, act right. Like that was kind of my instruction for my big girls, like, don't do that. Like, just, you should just know better. Like, I just expected that from them. But making character development and discipline and positive habits in the culture of our family part of our educational experience with my boys. So I very much have done that differently. With the girls, I pushed them toward independence pretty early. And part of that was seasonality because of their ages. They got to the age where they could be independent. And here I am having 2 more babies back to back. And if we're going to get any more school done, you've got to do this kind of independently and let mom check it. And I don't want to do that with my boys. I want to stay very engaged. And again, maybe you need your kids to be independent early. So this isn't a criticism of that, but this is just kind of what I've noticed, that I've shifted back toward not having a desire for them to be independent, but wanting to continue to do their school with them. And then I think community, like as my girls got older and it was harder to find, and they really got to that age of needing community during like the age of COVID. It was a very hard time. And so for everybody, and they didn't have quite like the kind of group activities that I would have liked, like being able to sit down and have these Socratic discussions and all those things because co-ops were closed down and everybody had a mask on. It was just awkward and you felt like you were having a panic attack the whole time. And so just being able to have those opportunities for my boys as they get into the middle school years and making that like a part of their academic progress and it not being just mom, just me and mom talking about it. It's just more fun to have those kind of discussions with your peers and more profitable for everybody. So I would say like keeping it fun in the young years, but also prioritizing character development and theology in the early years. And people are like theology, but you can absolutely teach very basic foundational theology in the early years. I feel I feel like, and I don't even know, this is just completely Erin's random observations from a small sampling size, but it seems to me that our kids, so much of their characters actually develop by the time they're like 9 years old. Like a lot of their personality, a lot of their ability to have self-control, to obey, to self-correct their attitude if they have a bad attitude, and develop positive habits, whether it's hygiene or like exercise and being, all these different habits that you want them to have as they go into adulthood, like those seem to need to be concreted by the time they're 9, 10 years old. Because then as they get in, as the hormones start to kick in, there's a whole different level of like development that's happening, right? And so the priority in their mind for all of that stuff is gone. And now they're testing, is what mom told me true? Is what dad told me real? Is that what I also believe? And they start thinking about things in that kind of like those middle years where they're debating it all out and figuring it out for themselves and really developing their personalities. And we've been very much more intentional with our boys in thinking like, of course, we're with them and it's formative and we are influencing them deeply. Well, if you have the relationship to well into teen years and young adulthood. And the greatest honor of my life is that my 20-year-old still comes and asks me what I think about things, like what do I do about this or how do I do this? But also like, what do you think? What do you think I should do? And just giving them like a foundation earlier on, I think and Charlotte Mason talks so much about all those habits and those, early on and developing those and how beneficial that is to self-control and development later on. So I think what we saw as important early on, I saw social time and friendships as very important at a younger age for my girls. And we've actually kind of flipped the script. Like, let's spend these first 10 years under the guidance and the primary influence in the development and the intentionality of mom and dad in discipleship and discipline and all these things. And then once we have that great foundation, then start worrying about having outside relationships and friendships and developing those and learning what it means to be a good friend and be a human being and all those things and treat people well. So those kind of have flipped for us too. And I think so far, so good. That's all we have, right?
Yeah. Trusting the Lord to work in our children, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Well, you've mentioned several times that you have different children with different learning challenges and neurodiversity in your family.
Mhm.
So what would be sort of some good tips for educating and parenting kids with learning differences, maybe who aren't quite on grade level?
The very first one is absolutely don't make it about yourself. Don't make it about your failings of any kind, like that you've not done something right. And also there simultaneously, if you inherently believe that you've messed up and that's caused this problem, then you also inherently believe that you need to fix it. And while there are things that are helpful, for our dyslexic kids, they did vision therapy. It was very, very helpful and made a very hard task a little bit easier for them. But it wasn't a remedy. It didn't change the fact that their brains just don't process language in the same way that a neurotypical brain does. And so that's number one, is like, don't make it about you. Don't make it a problem to fix. Help your child appropriate to help them. Don't baby them about it. Still figure out, and this is it's gray area, right? But figure out what is the challenge for them and keep them at that level, at that fruitful frustration thing. Don't have unrealistic expectations. And that's easier said than done because you're like, what are unrealistic expectations? What should I expect of my 8-year-old that has dyslexia? And I get those questions a lot, like, you know, so not normal because they're not reading at this level at this age. So what should I expect? And there is literally not an answer to that because every child that has dyslexia or any other learning disability, they are a singular, unique human being. And there is no guidepost for what you should be expecting, only that you're making progress and that you are consistently making progress. But even that, I've got one kid with dyslexia that he's making progress, but his progress, as slow as it feels for me at times, is 10 times faster than his sister that also had dyslexia. So their progress is very different, but they did make progress. So be much less concerned about the goalposts and the those types of things, and just focus on the progress. Are we making progress? And if you feel like you aren't making progress, look for outside help. That's another tip. When Callie really got, that's my 18-year-old, when she really got stuck in math, and I just felt like I was beating my head against a brick wall. Like it's hard. It's very frustrating. And it was frustrating for her. It's frustrating for everybody. And she just like her working memory is very poor. So like we would learn something and she always learned it instantaneously. It was like she learned it instantaneously and could do an entire sheet of it. And the next day we would sit down. It was like she had never seen that stuff before in her life. And so every day we were starting from the foundation, so we couldn't make any progress. And I enrolled her in a local school, like a private school that was like the school was created for kids with all kind of different abilities, and they just let her come for math. So I would drive her to the school and she would go in there and she would do math, and then she would come back out and we'd go homeschool everything else. And that was an amazing blessing for a season. And then a friend took over tutoring her for high school, and she got her up through what we consider her algebra 1, which was not algebra 1, but it was what we needed to get her through. That was academically her ceiling on mathematics. That was where she was going to get to. And it was unreasonable to expect anything other than that. So all that to say, like, just rest in the knowledge that you're not going to necessarily figure out a path, and to stop being concerned about certain benchmarks and just focus on the progress. And if there isn't progress, then get help. But if you're making progress, just keep doing what you're doing. And sometimes things will click and you'll get through something really fast that you expected not to. And then sometimes something's going to take 10 years longer than you expected it to. And that's just kind of like, it is what it is. But it's not, it's not mom's fault. She didn't do anything wrong. Our kids are like, nature versus nurture. Nature is like, it's real, like a lot of times we want to make everything be about especially as a homeschool mom, because you've made like your life and your day-to-day routine and sometimes our identities and stuff about educating our children and doing what's best for them and bringing out the best in them. And then when something's going sideways, we can feel like it's about us, and it's just not. So
And the flip side of that is we think when something's going really well, we want to think it's about us too, right?
yes,
So I
yes.
had my first child. Oh, that boy, he would eat all his vegetables from the earliest age. I mean, he would just, I didn't need to put anything on it, the green beans, the broccoli, he loved it. And I was
Yeah.
like, well, I am a very good parent. And I just don't understand why people can't get their children to eat vegetables. And then my next child came along. I did all the exact same things I had done with my oldest. Could
Mm-hmm.
not get her to eat vegetables for like years, like literal years. She would put
Yes.
them in her mouth. She wouldn't fight. And then she would just spit them out. Like there was, it just, I was like, well, I guess it was not about me at all.
Yes,
About the children.
that first kid gaslights you. They make you think that you're doing everything right, like sleeping through the night, potty trained at the right age, eating the vegetables, obeying mommy the first time, and then that second kid comes out feral. I don't. I don't know what it is. And they're like, you're doing everything different from me, by the way, and it's all going to be hard. So,
But it's good because, with homeschooling too, I have a blog post I wrote that says homeschooling is not a vending machine. We have this idea if we just do the right thing, we push the right buttons, we'll get
yeah,
out the perfect product. And that
yeah,
is unhealthy and unhelpful and just
yes,
not true. So, both for the little academic side of things and also
yeah,
for the bigger spiritual side of things. So, it's good to
absolutely.
remember that we are relying on the Lord's work in our children and not just us somehow being perfect homeschool parents.
And that it's not about glorifying us in the end, because ultimately it's the pride that makes you feel like that. You make things about you because you like it's either hurting your pride that things aren't looking as shiny as you wanted it to, or it's inflating your pride that things are looking as shiny as you hoped that it would. And I mean, some people I'm sure struggle with that more than others. I know I certainly have, but just recognizing that like not 1 ounce of it is about us. Like it's a calling that God has given us, but it's about our children and it's about his glory and his work in their lives and not about our own. And that can be a hard thing to like get all the way and kind of release that and stuff. But there's so much freedom in it when you realize that it's not about you at all, especially with kids with learning disabilities too.
Yeah. Well, it isn't about us. And also, we often need to take times of rest and
Mhm.
reflection. But how do we do that in the midst of busy, full lives?
You're so good at your transitions. So
I'm such a
okay.
professional.
Yes, you've nailed it. So I personally take quarterly retreats, which are not necessarily always like an option. I 100% get that. But where it came from in the first place was that I really got to a place of burnout. And in two babies, back to back, my boys are 15 months old. And then I had the kids in all the seasons, and my husband was traveling a lot for work. And then my mom passed away suddenly in a car accident. And I didn't really have time to like grieve that loss because I was surrounded by children all the time. And like the world kept spinning, even though I felt like it certainly should not. And just, I got to this place where I was like literally just thinking about like packing my stuff in my car and just like disappearing. I was just so burned out. And you should never get there in the first place. Like, you should definitely have some breaks. Going to the grocery store by yourself, by the way, is not a break. That's not a rest. And I feel like everyone's personalities kind of make this a little bit different. So for me, I'm deeply introverted. I can pretend to be an extrovert, but I'm very introverted. I need a lot of downtime. And I think I'm classified as like a highly sensitive person. So even though I had no learning disabilities in school, my adult children I have ADHD apparently, and super highly sensitive. So I get really touched out very fast, and the sounds, all the noise, and I just need like it is, I used to feel bad about this, but I can confidently say, like, I need to be alone and be in quietness sometimes. And the more stressful things are in life and the more hectic and loud things are in life, the more I need that. And of course, my tolerance for those things have been stretched over the years. But sometimes that also kind of wears you down because you're just with it all the time and you're not meeting your own needs. So, I first kind of ran away for a weekend. And what I realized is like I had not been spending time with the Lord every day like I needed to. And it was hard because I would get up early to do it, and somebody else would always get up when I got up, and it wouldn't be quiet and kind of perfect like I felt like it needed to be. And so because I wasn't doing it right, I just kind of stopped doing it. And so that was the first thing, is just like recognizing we have to be in the presence of the Lord every day, even if that means putting on your headphones and listening to one worship song while you load the dishwasher when you know that everybody is safely playing. Like reading one scripture and just meditating on that throughout the day. It doesn't have to be, my Matthew Henry commentary and like all these things I like to have spread out. I love to do those big deep dives, and I can do that now. Like I'm in a different season than I was, but for a long time, I couldn't do that. And so just doing whatever you need to do to fill your spirit while you can. And then also like if you are someone that's in a season of like you're not sleeping. Okay, I get these sweet mamas all the time, like when I talk about getting up early before your family and getting in God's word, and they're like, I haven't slept in 5 years. And I'm like, please don't get up before your children. Like, let them wake you up. Like, it can be good for your mental health to greet them instead of them greeting you. But at the same time, this is how Navy SEALs talk, the sleep deprivation. And if you've had child after child after child and you've nursed and you've had, I mean, you just can literally go like a little longer and you need your rest. So that's one thing. First of all, try to get as much sleep as you can and be very gracious to yourself if you're not getting the sleep that you need. And don't hold yourself to some unreasonable, like out of season standard for yourself. But then, so I would go away and I just sleep most of the time because I don't have good sleeping children. Everybody's got like acid reflux and all these things. So um, I just went years without sleeping. So I would just go away and I would sleep. And I would, at the end of the weekend, I would think, I don't need 6 cups of coffee today. I thought I was addicted to caffeine, but actually I was just not ever awake unless I drank it. So just kind of like getting back in touch with your own identity outside of your family. So even if a quarterly retreat isn't something that you could do, trying to find a way, being honest with your husband about needing more sleep, if you need more sleep, how he can help you in that way. Not trying to be a superhero, not trying to be super mom. He is your partner. And also, just like being in God's word, no matter when that is. So those are very restful things, like physically resting your body, because almost nothing else matters if you haven't slept, right? Like everything else goes out the door. And then spending time in God's word, but then also making time for your own identity. And sometimes I get some pushback when I talk about this, like a mother shouldn't need to be away from her children in order to rest. And a mother's job is her children and all these kinds of things. Like we are mothers are, for our whole adult life once we've had children, that doesn't stop. But we are active mothers for a season. We are our own individual before we have them. And then one day they will leave our house and they will rarely be back. And even no matter how engaged you are in their life, like they're still living an entire life that really doesn't have anything to do with you anymore. And so when your kids get to that age, you need to have some you left over. And so maybe that doesn't necessarily mean going away for weekends and whatnot. Like everybody has their thing that they need to do and that they can do. But, I've started working on, like, I'm not announcing this as any kind of goal, but I've recently set the idea of being able to do a half marathon by the time I'm 45. I turn 43 next week, or no, this week. It's this week. And so I turned 43 on Wednesday. And so I'm like, in 2 years, I would like to be able to do a half marathon without dying. Because right now I would definitely die to do that. And just kind of having, so I'm going to start walking a certain amount and having some goals related to that. And that's not about anybody but me. And it's just, I've always thought running was the worst. And I've always admired people who do it and actually like it. So I want to see if I can be a person that runs and actually likes it. I might not, we'll see. But I'm embroidering and listening to audiobooks and just doing things when my kids are in bed and they're watching TV. That is my interest. It's something. I'm making sourdough, like gluten-free sourdough is like way better than normal gluten-free bread. And so just find things. They don't have to be expensive. They don't have to consume more than 30 minutes to an hour of your day or even your week if you're not spending any time on yourself right now. But remember that at the end of your child rearing years, that you and your husband are going to be there together and you're going to be back, just the two of you again. And you need to still know who you are. You still need to know who your husband is. You still need to have a marriage at the end of that time. And so just resting by taking care of your own, just tending your own identity just a little bit, just when you can, making that a little bit more of a priority is very restful because you feel rejuvenated in having something outside of just diapers or teenagers, fender benders and like all the drama and the stress of normal life. And that helps you be a better mom, like stepping away from your family, very brief amount of time. So whatever that is for you, it helps you come back to them with a renewed energy and renewed passion for being a mom, for homeschooling, for homemaking, all of those things. And so that's what I learned was like, if I didn't put my oxygen mask on first, I wasn't serving anyone well. And so if I do what I need to do to put my oxygen mask on first, I can be the mom to them that I want to be. And that makes them happy. And then they're happy. They are happy for me to go away for my weekends. Like they have fun with dad and they do stuff that they don't do with mom. And then I come back and I'm like, nice mom again, and we start all over.
Yes, I always find that when I've had, some time away, a little bit of respite from my family, it's so exciting to come back. So I'm like, oh, I really do love you guys, really do
Yes.
like you, right? I actually really do like you. I actually missed you. There's something nice about that.
Absence makes the heart grow fonder. And it's true. Like I work with my husband. He's at home all the time with me, with us. And he went away for the weekend, and it was the first time like we've been away from each other for a few months and we're literally together 24/7. And it was like, hey, I like you again. I missed you while you were gone. Like
Yeah.
I love you all the time, but it's nice to miss somebody sometimes too. So it's a good thing.
Well, Erin, this has been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you for taking the time to chat. I know this is going to be an encouragement to other homeschool moms right there in the trenches. Just to, I think sometimes know that we're not alone. Like
Yes,
we're not crazy. Like this is hard and challenging, but it's also rich and beautiful.
it is.
But here at the end, I want to ask you the questions I ask all my
Okay.
guests. And so the first is just, what are you personally reading lately?
Okay, so I don't read fiction. I used to read a lot of fiction. Like I read every book R.L. Stein wrote in high school. That's how deep I went. But I don't read a lot of fiction because I get obsessed with it and then I don't sleep. I just read instead. So that was something I just stopped doing like a long time ago. So I started reading again and I read first Lynn Austen's Gods and Kings. And I love a historical fiction that's like taking place in the days of Hezekiah. And so I always feel like I've got to be accomplishing something, even if that's just for my enjoyment. So I feel like I'm learning so much. Like I didn't know Hezekiah and Isaiah were alive and Mike, all that was at the same time. And so that book sparked me to get a, what's the Bibles that are in chronological
Yeah.
Bible. That's what it's called. Yeah. And so I got one of those and it's just like, all these connections, like I just didn't even know that they were there. So I'm about to start Song of Redemption, which is the second in that series. So I'm really enjoying that. I always do a mixture of kind of like fiction and nonfiction. So I'm trying to remember what my fiction is. I took like 2 weeks off from my audiobooks and now they're ghosting my brain. But that's the number one thing that like I can't wait to get started on again is that next book in that series. I'm loving it.
That sounds really fun and enjoyable. Yeah, I love really making the connections since the Bible is not organized chronologically. Sometimes we miss connections until you
Yes.
realize all those things are happening at the same time, and it helps us
Yes.
understand so much more deeply. So that's really
Yeah,
cool.
absolutely.
All right, final question. What is your best tip for the homeschool day that is going all wrong?
Um, Probably stop it. Just like whatever it is, like Charlotte Mason's change is good as a rest, but she actually never specifically said that. People will attribute that to her, but I could not find that she actually said it. But she like writes about the notion of a change being as good as a rest. And so if things are just going sideways, and normally, sometimes it's just the day. Like normally a kid reads fine and today they're in tears and they're having a hard time with the reading or the math or whatever, then maybe their brain just isn't braining that well. Like I have days where my brain is not braining. I said 4 or 5 like totally non-words earlier and my daughter was like, Mom, if you eaten enough today, you're going on a podcast and you're making words up while you're talking. I was like, my brain's not braining today. And so that just happens sometimes. So find something else to do. Turn on a Torchlighter movie or whatever. Like just do something to pull out the paints, do something a little bit different, get out of the house. I just really feel like if things are normally pretty okay and you're just having a bad day or even a bad week, sometimes if people have been sick, it can take a little time for everybody's bodies and minds to kind of get back in order before they're able to really dial in again. And so just giving everybody the space that they need and not feeling that like there's a thumb pressing down on you and you have to get these things done, or like the homeschool police. Most of us do not have a homeschool police in most of our states. So nobody's going to show up and flog you that day if you don't get that lesson done. And, if you're like me and you use Homeschool Planet, you go in and click push to next day and it just moves everything out and everything's okay. So just change as it goes to rest.
I love it. Erin, where can people find you all around the internet?
So we are primarily in our email list. So if you go to shopgentleclassical.com, if you get any of our free stuff, like you can click free teacher's guides at the top of that and input your email, you'll be on our email list. I think there's an email subscription thing at the bottom. We also have a blog that is lifeabundantlyblog.com. And any of our freebies, sidebar on that, you can get onto our email list. That's 99% of my communication. We are not active on social media right now. We've just started a Sabbath year, which is more about not doing new things and just kind of stewarding what we already have. And I don't love social media, and I'll post a sale to it, but you're probably not going to find me like in stories and stuff like that. But the accounts are there. We're Gentle Classical Press on Instagram and on Facebook. We have YouTube, which we're going to be working on more a little bit this next year. So again, I think it's Erin Cox Gentle Classical on YouTube. And so you can pretty much Google us and find us anywhere. And but if you want to stay in communication, hear about any products we have or any encouragement, I send out 2 emails a week that are like, sometimes a product is mentioned, but mostly it's just me running my mouth about whatever's on my mind at the time, that can sometimes be helpful.
Yeah. All right. Well, I will have links to all of those things in the show notes for this episode at humilityanddoxology.com. I would really encourage, if you are listening, please take a moment to leave a rating and review for the podcast. If you are watching, then make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss future homeschool conversations, and take the time to share the episode with a friend that could use some real life homeschool mom encouragement. And I'm so glad that you guys have been with us today. And Erin, I'm glad you have been here to share your story with us. So thanks again for coming.
Thank you for having me, Amy.